Bravery is a complicated virtue. It often comes up when you need it and often leads to great things. The bravery to jump off a cliff into a scenic lake. The bravery to ask out that person that you've had your eye on for a minute. But then sometimes you're asked to be brave when you're not ready. Sometimes you're asked to be brave about something that you never thought you'd have to be brave for. And I think I'll Be Brave Tomorrow hones in on one of the moments that you never hope someone has to be brave for, but often requires the most bravery out of anyone on this planet Earth. And that is when a child comes down with an illness that often leaves you, the parents, and anyone involved in that child's life not knowing what's going to happen next. Hi, I'm Exaclaw. If you're new here, hi. If you're not new here, welcome back. What I'm going to spend today doing is showing you how I'll Be Brave Tomorrow, in its gameplay and its story, captures the emotional toll of a child battling and negotiating with their illness. I'm hoping this video will be interesting, but more than anything, it's not going to be light. I'm going to put up the trigger warnings that the game puts up at the beginning so that you also know what you need to be ready for. If you're in a place where you're not going to be left in a better place after this video because of these trigger warnings, please come back later. The video's not going anywhere. I'm not going anywhere. The beautiful and horrifying thing about the internet is that everything's here forever, unless you're Game Informer. The synopsis of How I'll Be Brave Tomorrow, developed by Inkforge Studio, is as follows. How I'll Be Brave Tomorrow is a narrative adventure game telling the story of a sick child playing a 2D platformer. Now, most interestingly about this game is that it was made in partnership with Great Ormond Street Hospital charity, a charity at the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which is one of the leading children's hospitals in the world. The charity's goal is to give children with serious illnesses fuller, funner, and longer childhoods. And if you need an extra incentive to pick up this game, 50% of the game's revenue will be going to the Great Ormond Street Hospital to help them build a new children's cancer center. The children's artwork actually appears in the game. They are a big part of the process of making this game apparently. They got their input not just in including their artwork, but also in how the actual gameplay went. And the founder and creative director of Inkforge Studio was actually someone that used to be at Great Ormond Street Hospital, apparently starting as a few weeks old. So he's actually, I guess what you would consider alumni of the space. So a lot of his own experience is actually present in this game and the gameplay that's in it. Now, while the game and the PR around it implies cancer, there's actually no part in the game that makes a specific nod at what illness, what type of cancer, or if something besides cancer that Robin, the game's kid, actually has, which I think was a smart decision. I think if they had decided to use a specific illness, you could have gotten caught in the weeds of people looking up, oh, well, this illness actually can show up like this, can show up like this, which would have been fine. And if they wanted to focus on a specific illness, that would have been a perfectly fine decision to make. But I think by not saying what the specific thing is that Robin has, it makes you as a player pay more attention to his experience, his emotions, and how his body is being asked to maneuver this new condition that he's working with, rather than getting hung up on the specific illness he has. And again, it is implied that it's cancer, but there's a lot of different types of cancer, so I still consider that pretty broad. Now, let's actually talk about the game. I knew I was going to be in for a ride with this game. Immediately started with the white screen, and all you can really hear on the white screen is a heart thumping, this bum bum, bum bum, bum bum, signaling that something has gone wrong. And as your vision starts to clear and you're no longer just seeing a flashing white light, you start to learn a bit more about what happened to Robin. You learn that he suddenly collapsed at school. I think to start this game this way was really smart because I think it captures the surprise element that finding out your child has a serious illness often has. Even at the beginning of the game, you're not necessarily knowing what's going on. Robin doesn't know, his parents don't know, and it doesn't seem like the doctors know either, hence why they're at the hospital, having you go through the motions of moving your body and figuring out what your current condition is like. I think that surprise element is a huge thing because most parents aren't really expecting their kid to have a serious illness. Unless there's a family history of that sort of thing, it's not something that you ever hope to have to plan for. And so many people often just don't until it hits you in the face, unfortunately. Now, another part of this intro that I also really liked, but because it was one of the first moments to break my heart in a small way, was the way that it had you learn how to use your controls. At first, it's doing something as simple as having you move the camera button, looking left, looking right, figuring out, okay, what's your movement? But then it gives you a button prompt. I hit it, and I can see the attempt to get up, but he can't. It's the first instance in the game where suddenly limitation hits you in the face. Through most of this game, as Robin's character, human Robin, that's something that I'll explain in a second, you can't move your body. You can move your head, you can look around. You can look around the rooms that you will end up being in. You will be able to look around the courtyard that you will be going through as the game progresses. But never once for all the time that you're in the hospital can you actually move your body. Now, when this happened, I felt so sad, but I also love the intentionality of that moment because I think a huge thing that this game wants to get across in this battle that this child is now learning he has to fight is that a huge part of it is a loss of agency. So much of the things that you want to do, you're no longer going to be able to do. Something that comes as a theme for Robin throughout this game is, he talks about all the things that he wants to be doing rather than be at the hospital. He wants to be home at his bed, accessing more of his big toys. Fortunately, Robin has some pretty good parents, it seems, and they bring a lot of his toys, including a gaming console, nice, to his hospital room as he changes rooms and as the seasons pass. But it's not a replacement for the things that he already knows he likes. He can't play soccer with his friends. He can't move around the courtyard himself as doctor's orders. He even, at certain points of the game, has a hard time even picking his head up. I'm going to be jumping around through the stages of the game a lot as I'm talking about this, and I think that's going to be important in this case, just not only for incentive for you to go check it out yourself, but to get across some of these larger elements of why this game pulls off this emotional portrayal of a very serious moment in a child's life very well. At the end of the game, even as things are looking kind of rough, he's increasingly admitting that he's having a hard time dealing with the journey that's going on. He's not liking the progress of his condition. He's watched, at this point, 2 to 3 seasons already pass, summer, fall, winter's coming, and even moving his head left to right, there's a noticeable slowing in the camera, how much he can even look around his own room. It's very scary, honestly, because a lot of the time, you don't know what's really going on. That's something else that I'll say about this game is that for a lot of it, you're not really given the nuance and details of his actual journey and progress through his cancer. I'm going to say it's cancer for now because of just, again, the PR and everything. Even though they don't specifically ever say cancer, they have the cancer bell too of when you beat it. That's something that the nurse talks about with him in the courtyard. So I'm going to say cancer, but you don't ever get to hear the progress of his health. Not really. Everything that you learn is pretty much through small little tidbits here or there from the nurse, and then seeing how he himself is dealing with whatever current stage of the treatment he's at. So a lot in this game, honestly, I was also just kind of afraid for him. As much as Robin here is being asked to be brave, a lot of time that player is being asked to be brave as well, and just even hoping that he gets better, because there's not a lot of clarity. There's a lot of unknown stuff happening, which I think is also intentional. I don't think it's a lack of not knowing. These guys know what they're talking about. I think talking about the treatment in this way as just this nebulous thing that you don't really understand was a really good decision in capturing the child's experience. Because at the end of the day, this isn't meant to be a game just to talk about people with serious illnesses in general. It's very specifically about children. And children can really understand so much and also only ever be told so much, so as to not become too afraid or as to not be too bogged down in details they shouldn't be worried about quite yet. Something else I'm going to start talking about now, past the limited agency you have in this game because of your condition, is the way that they show Robin's own progression of battling his illness. Because when it first starts off, he doesn't know how long he's going to be there. The intro starts off in this room that looks a lot like a closet, but it's just a regular hospital room where they're trying to figure out what's going on with him. He has a small TV. It's giving very much intermediate space or interim space. And something to note is that this game progresses through the platformer that he plays to pass the time. And I'll talk more about the platformer because it's a whole other element of this game that I really like how they paralleled it with Robin's own journey. But as you progress through the levels, that's when you see the rooms change after you finish those 2D platformer levels. So after the first time you finish it and you come back, you find out that he's in a bigger room. And the reason that I really like that intention of not seeing the room change like that until after you finish the level is because I think it really highlights the speed at which things somehow move. I think it does a good job of capturing the quickness of things progressing worse, honestly speaking, or of the severity of it being acknowledged very quickly. And then also contrasting that with the slow pace of being able to even leave the hospital once you have noticed the severity of what's going on. But as those things are happening, like I said, you see Robin, who doesn't know what's going on at first. He doesn't really understand the full scope of things. You can tell that he's also still pretty confused about how long he's going to be here. He's hoping it won't be for a long time. He's hoping that he'll be able to go home, play with his friends sooner rather than later. But as time passes, even as a child, you start to understand the gravity of what's happening. There's this really poignant moment where I feel like I saw the first real shift in Robin's behavior and in his understanding of what's going on, at least told to the players, when he's in the courtyard for, I think, the first time with Nurse Bella, who's a gem in this game, by the way. Shout out nurses. You don't get paid enough. You don't get appreciated enough. But he's in the courtyard with Nurse Bella. As they're walking, talking, as he's learning about the courtyard and more about the whole process, he hits her with the question of, it's the first moment where he really hits you that, like, even though he may not understand all the medical terminology or understand the full scope of what's going on, he understands that he's here longer than he expected to be, and that he's being cut off from several things that he often loves doing, and it's being treated with a certain level of carefulness that indicates something is wrong with him. It's a really heartbreaking moment. While also being another moment that I think really highlights the way adults have to figure out how to talk to you. I think, again, Nurse Bella is a gem in this game, not just because of being a nurse and helping this kid out, but I think she's also a great character to see how adults figure out how to talk to children with serious illnesses in a way that's still acknowledging that they're a child, still not trying to offload the entire scariness and severity of what's happening to them, not trying to put that weight on them, but also making sure you're not talking to them as if nothing's happening, because obviously something is. And I think Nurse Bella's character specifically does a very good job of showing how adults often have to play this game of balance of how much you can tell the kid without it being too much for them. Now, to talk more about how Robin deals with all of this, we now need to actually go to the platformer element of this game, which is also fondly called How Be Brave Tomorrow. Now, How Be Brave Tomorrow is probably one of the most simple, stripped-back platformers you'll ever play. It stars a bird who is also called Robin, this time with an I, who is looking for his father throughout the game. You collect these feathers as you go through each level, even though they're not mandatory to progress through the level. They're more just nice little collectibles. And all you do in this game is you run, you jump, you dodge, you glide. Now, the reason that I like the platform element of this so much, despite it being pretty simple, all things considered, is that I think its simplicity is perfect, because at the end of the day, this was a game meant for a child. Not the game that I'm talking about, but the platformer in question that you're seeing on screen now. They want to make sure it's something that a kid can play and have fun playing with still a bit of challenge for a kid at that age. So I think the game pulls that off really well. I think the best analogy that I figured out is if you were ever in elementary school or middle school and you had a computer lab at your school, or even access to a laptop or a desktop at home and played Flash games all day, that's what I felt like playing. But outside of intentionally making sure the platformer felt like a kid's game that was still enjoyable to play, it's not subtle at all about its parallels that it's trying to make with Robin the bird and Robin the human. And what I would go as far as to say is I think Robin the bird specifically does a good job of capturing the emotions that Robin the human may not always be showing off very easily in the real life portions of the game. Throughout the platformer, Robin the bird is very nervous, very unsure of himself. They're constantly needing support from other people to go to the next stage, whether it be Fred the Frog here, who's actually a stuffed animal in the real life portion of the game too, that the real life Robin leans on a lot for support and talking to when he's alone in his room. You also have the snail character that appears, and even though there is this other portion of the game where you have Wasp that try and attack Robin the bird for a while, once you get through what could only be called a boss battle of attrition with Queen Wasp, even she, after seeing how tired Bird Robin is throughout his journey of looking for his father, she lets him just go. There's a constant tone of making sure this bird gets the support they need to help find their father and get to that next stage. I think that's a great parallel for real life Robin, not only because of just also the constant support that he's getting from not only the treatment and adults that are constantly in the background of his life, but the stuffed animals that you see laid on the bed that often play a big part in this game, and letting him kind of get some kind of external support from inside his mind. Because at the end of the day, these animals can't actually talk. This isn't one of those games where it's like there's a magical element. He is, at the end of the day, playing as the stuffed animal the same way that you would ever play with an action figure, using a different voice like this, hey, Mr. Action Figure. Like, he's doing the same thing. So he's also, in a lot of ways, just having to figure out how to give himself support. I think those moments where he's talking to the stuffed animal, while really nice and kind of cute, because, A, they're cutely designed, and it's just nice to see that he is getting some kind of support and leaning on these stuffed animals. It does portray and highlight how lonely this experience is and how often you are alone. Because this is a hospital at the end of the day. It's not like he's the only kid there, which means the nurses, the doctors, the general attendants are doing a bunch of other things. And so he's often being left to his own devices. In this case, quite literally, you realize just how much he depends on this game to pass the time. Quite often, the only thing that he ever talks about, and is always kind of in a bit of a rush to get back to it, even when he's talking to the stuffed animals. And during that journey, you can sense the tiredness in him. And that tiredness gets portrayed really well in the platformer. Robin the bird, kind of jumping, gliding, going through all of this nonsense that's new to them, that's scary to them, that's exhausting to them. You can see the tiredness take its toll on both characters that's happening at the same time. For example, after that Queen Wasp fight that I mentioned earlier, Robin the bird goes and talks to Fred the frog, who got captured by the other wasps and was being held hostage until the rain came. You see Robin admit in that moment, and it's very clearly paralleling the part of the treatment that human Robin is at and the exhaustion that they're feeling. And not just the physical exhaustion of what's going on with their body, but also just mentally you can tell that it's really, really starting to take their toll on the kid. He's getting angry, he's getting upset, he's starting to vent to the other stuffed animals. It's getting to a point where he almost doesn't even want to hear support. He just needs someone to tell him that it's over. And it really does capture that moment of this kid really is going through so much. And even if it doesn't always immediately feel like a lot as you're playing it, since so much of it is ultimately spent between the bed and the wheelchair in the courtyard, it takes its toll. It mentally, emotionally takes its toll. And I think discussing that tired element is so important here, and I'm really glad that it did it well and with a certain level of grace. Now, the platformer part of this game is definitely the meat of it and easily the distraction that Robin likes the most from what's going on. The game does something really smart that I want to talk about to capture the constrained feeling that this illness is putting on this child, and as well as how they're making the most of it. And that's through the mini games that take place in the hospital rooms. See, in the downtime when you're playing as human Robin, where you're not in the platform and it's kind of looking around this room, there's actually a lot of mini games that you have access to that you can play with that are from the toys that your parents bring in. For example, the first mini game you get access to is this RC racing car game where you try to beat the time, or just in general beat this blue mysterious racer as you go around this track made up of what's in your hospital room. It's a very simple mini game and honestly kind of drags quite nicely. But more than anything, what immediately stood out to me was that it doesn't do what the platformer does and puts you in a whole different world and, kind of lets you jump around and move around super freely. It all takes place within the confines of the hospital room. And I think that's a really interesting decision here to point out the fact that this is a kid who's ultimately making the best of the very limited resources that he has. He can't go outside on his own, he can't move on his own, but he can still create games and adventure out of the space that he has been limited to. And it's a beautiful way to highlight not just the need to figure out ways to pass the time, because you can only play that platformer game for so long, but also the imagination that kids have and how they use it to cope with things that they're dealing with. And the minigames here actually are fun. Like I said, there was the RC car minigame I just mentioned. There's this paper airplane one where you're just aiming for the trash can in the different places in the room, so you're throwing them out, which makes it a good time to say sorry to the person who I hit when I threw the airplane out the window. Didn't know that was going to happen, didn't know I was going to hit somebody, my bad. There's also this Floor is Lava game. You might also be noticing a trend that all of these are very childish games too. None of these are like super serious, complicated rules or anything. It's very simple games that you can play on the fly, play quickly, and just figure out from there. And in general, something that I really liked about these mini games and just toys that you see increasingly being added to the hospital room as the seasons change is not just the fact that the mini games are actually fun and they like do a really good job of capturing the fact that Robin is still a kid with an active imagination who needs to find ways to pass the time when he doesn't want to play the platformer. But I think it's also unfortunately captures another way of how severe things are getting. Because as the seasons pass, you're having more and more stuff added to this room. More of your stuffed animals, more toys. It's a very sad realization that if not necessarily things are getting explicitly worse, you are expected to be there longer. So it's another small way that the game kind of shows rather than tells you the severity of things going on. I'll even share my own experience with this. When I was in the second grade, actually, I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks, ICU for about a week and a half, 2 weeks of those from a pretty serious respiratory thing that I had. It was extremely touch and go. I ended up missing school in general for about 2 months because I was already out of school for a week before I went into the hospital. And then after being out of the hospital, I had to be at home for still 2 weeks. Had a lot of mobility during that time, so like I'm not trying to say it's a one-to-one, but something that I very strongly remember from that experience was so many people bringing me toys to play with. My second grade teacher brought Geronimo Stilton books for me to read. One of the classmates that I had who had a parent work at the hospital who was just in the area came and played Battleship with me. I had even like Scooby-Doo DVDs brought over. Like there was just constantly people coming in bringing stuff to help me pass the time of things that either I did own and, you know, played with in my own free time at my house, or things that they knew I would like and they brought to me to like help pass the time. It's one of those things where despite all of that, you understand that everyone's doing this for a reason. Because even now I can't even talk about like what the specific respiratory illness was. I just know it was a respiratory thing, but I could tell it was bad. You know, I'm just getting all this stuff that I would have never gotten in a different scenario. So there's obviously an element of fear that I'm registering in the people visiting me that are trying to make me feel better, but also don't know what's going to happen next. And on the subject of fear, let's actually talk now about the way the game discusses fear, specifically through one element that stood out almost more than the mini games, almost more than the platform itself, was this children's book called The Cub Who Could Not Hibernate. The premise of the book is actually very simple. It's time for the bears to hibernate. Parents are telling the kid, hey, get ready to hibernate. And the cub does not want to hibernate. They're afraid of hibernating, so they end up running away. And on their journey, as they're running away, they bump into a few different animals. In this order, it's a squirrel, a bald eagle, and a wolf cub. And each interaction with the animal pretty much goes the same way, or at least most of the time. They meet the animal. The animal's like, hey, shouldn't you be hibernating? The bear cub says, hey, I don't want to hibernate, I'm scared. And they give each their own different answers. The squirrel basically hits them with the trust me bro, you should be hibernating, which I find to be really funny because it is such a non-answer. It is genuinely a this is good for you, trust me, I'm old, I'm wise, which could be true. And like even then I think is also kind of again hinting at the you need to be brave or just kind of go with it element of all this. It's not an answer that gives you comfort. It's not an answer that a kid can readily accept. Hell, even an adult couldn't readily accept that all the time. So he moves past the squirrel, goes to the bald eagle, and the bald eagle basically says, well, why don't you come migrate with me? I.e., his solution is run away from the problem, run away from the issue, don't deal with your don't deal with your fear, just keep running away from it. This doesn't work for the bear either. At this point in the story, the bear is starting to miss his family, starting to like understand like this is not something that he can keep running away from forever, so he goes away from the bald eagle. And then he meets the wolf cub. Now before I tell you about his interaction with the wolf cub, I should tell you that the reason that the cub bear has been so afraid of hibernating in the first place is that he's not sure he's going to wake up. He's really afraid of what I perceive as dying. Honestly speaking, a child's way of portraying death. You know, children hopefully don't need to have a big understanding of death because they're kids, and that's hopefully something that they won't have to deal with for a long time. But at the end of the day, again, think about the severity of what we're dealing with here. And so I think having this children's book portray this in a way through a bear who's afraid to hibernate because they don't know if they're going to wake up is phenomenal way to help a kid understand the emotional aspect of it. Because what I will say clearly is that this book isn't a one-to-one for the journey that Robin has at all. But I do think what it does, almost more importantly than being a one-to-one, is helping Robin work through the fear of not knowing what's going to happen next. Because if you really want to break down what that fear is for the bear cub, before being a fear of death, because again, this is a child, and while I can't speak to Robin's experience of how well they understand death, this is taking place in a part of the game where he understands things are getting serious and things are getting worse, and that he doesn't know what's going to happen next. If not necessarily the fear of death and of dying during this whole thing, it is the fear of not knowing what's going to happen next. Which brings us to the bear cub. After running away from the eagle, the bear cub gets lost in the woods for a while. He's lonely. He misses his family now. He's ready to go back, but still afraid at this point of hibernating. And he's crying and lamenting his situation. He meets a wolf cub. Now, what's really interesting about this meeting with the wolf cub is that it is at this point where the bear cub admits that he knows he should hibernate. But he's also still scared. He can't forget the fact that he's scared. And as they're talking and, telling each other about their stories, the wolf cub says something to the bear that is probably the most liberating thing the bear cub could have heard, and by extension, Robin could have heard to deal with their fear. But if we cannot control it, why should it control us? It's a moment that gave me goosebumps, very literally. Even saying it now, I feel like I'm still getting goosebumps. Because what a liberating way to think. And I think it's a way of thinking that you have to adopt to be brave. If there's any moment in this game where I think Robin and you as the player learn what it means to be brave, it is this moment. It is the moment of recognizing you are afraid and you can't do anything about that fear, but you should not let that fear do anything to you to get better. It's a great moment, it's wonderful, and it wraps up everything about the game up so nicely in this one large portion. And even past just like how I personally felt about this moment, this is treated as the most liberating part of the game. Because right after this line hits in the platformer world, which has now become winter, because the platformer world always corresponds to whatever season's going on, where Robin the bird, who is now kind of surviving through the winter, not dealing with any enemies because everyone else is now asleep because it's winter, runs into Don Hedgehog. Someone I haven't really mentioned here because it hasn't been important to mention him quite yet. Mostly because he's just an antagonist in the game that often bumps head and chases Bird Robin throughout the experience. Bird Robin is really afraid for a moment, but then even Don Hedgehog, seeing what Bird Robin has been going through, says, "Hey, I'm hibernating. You're safe to just stay with me for a minute. We're not going to do anything. Just go to sleep." It's this moment of like, where you really start to see how that line helped Robin personally, even helped the bird Robin, because it's giving them the opportunity to actually rest. It's giving them the freedom to rest, to just finally be brave, go with the process, and accept whatever might come next. Again, I love the way that the game wraps up right after that line, because everything just starts kind of coming together nicely in that thematic way. And wonderfully, after all that line stuff, after he wakes up, after Robin the bird wakes up, after you hear that liberating line, the game throws you into this black abyss, and then you see the bell that you're allowed to ring 3 times, and that when the game fades to black and fades back to color, you are now actually in your home. Not as a dream, not as a memory, but as you, Robin, having completed the treatment, still a little weak, still needing to kind of heal from the whole journey, still needing to take it slow, but now actually home, knowing that you're going to be better. But yeah, that was How I'll Be Brave Tomorrow. Took me just under 3 hours to finish the game. You could probably get through it faster if you don't even do all the optional stuff. I really do recommend it, not just because that 50% of the revenue, again, is going to go to the Great Ormond Street Hospital charity for them to build a new child cancer center, but also because I think this is a wonderful game, and the way that its mechanics portray the constraint and limited agency you have, the way that the child needs to find distractions, create games not just from the stuff that's in their room, but from the stuff that their parents bring them, from the bubbling and constantly underlying fear that's present the entire time. This game does an amazing job with all of it and ultimately accomplishes the aim that it's set out to, which is self-described as creating an authentic representation that faithfully delivered on the emotional aspect of hospital care. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you took away something from it. Please, if you have the time, check it out. There's a lot of small stuff that I didn't mention about this game. If you had a chance to play it yourself, please tell me how you liked it. Tell me how you related to the message if you did. Tell me what you took away from it. If you liked what I said here, you liked the video, leave a like, subscribe. Hoping to do more stuff like that. I've got definitely a few more videos on the pipeline. So then until next time, please take care of yourself. Take care of your loved ones. Thanks for watching. Ciao.